As you know, Tamron promised to launch at least 4 new lenses in 2023. They didn't release any specs or additional info about what they will release, but what we know for sure is that they patented a ton of exciting lenses for full-frame APS-C mirrorless camera systems, and the latest one being the 75mm 1.4 full-frame mirrorless lens, a patent they published a couple of weeks ago. And I will now walk you through the list of all those lenses, but before that, please take 2 seconds time to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button to not miss any of my upcoming rumors. So here you see now the patent for the 75mm 1.4 lens. You see the optical design, you see the specs, and those kind of patents have been published. And just to be clear, having such a patent doesn't mean that they will really make the lens for mass production. Most of those patents will not make it into a real lens, but they are proof at least what they are thinking about doing, and it's quite exciting to see what the folks are behind of each of those primes and zooms. So now I want you to walk through all the list of patented Tamron lenses and give you my 2 cents about each of those lenses. And I also launched a survey on sonyaforrumors.com where I ask my readers to vote for the best patented lenses, the lenses they want Tamron to really launch on the market, and I hope this will somehow influence Tamron to release those kind of exciting lenses that we all want. So here you see the list. On the left you see the patented full-frame lenses, on the right the patented APS-C lenses. I ordered them by the widest to the most tele focal length, and let's start with the first one, which is also one of the most exciting lenses, the 20 to 50mm 2.0. I have no doubt they have to do this lens. This would become the fastest zoom lens in the E-mount full-frame range, and also finally somehow a competitor to the Canon 28 70mm 2.0, which is a super nice fast zoom lens. And Tamron here would go a different route with a much wider and shorter focal length from 20 to 50mm, which I personally find very exciting. I think 20mm is very interesting for landscape photographer or also vloggers if they want to use a huge zoom on their camera. But I think they should really do it. It would be exciting, and 20 to 50mm is right the perfect focal length for me to use for my kind of photography whenever I go hiking. So my only doubt of this lens is how big this lens would become, if it would be too massive to carry around. I hope not, but I hope to see it in real one day, maybe even in 2023. Now let's go further with some zooms. They patented 3 interesting zooms between the 2400mm range, the 24-110 4.0, the 2800mm 2.8, and the 2820mm 4.0. Those are all variations of a same idea of travel zoom lens. Some might prefer having the more compact 4.0 lens with a 24mm at the start, or some other might prefer to have the super massive 2.8 constant aperture zoom, which also sounds exciting. Probably I'm not a big zoom fan for those kind of in that kind of range, so I have no opinion on that, but let me know in the comment system what you think about it. They also patented a ton of prime lenses, the 28, 30, 35, 40, 50, 75mm, all 1.4 fast aperture primes. I think most of them might be very redundant, like particularly the 50mm 1.4. They're like currently I think nearly 60 50mm prime lenses in the E-mount range, and I think Tamron really shouldn't bother to release another 50mm 1.4 lens. It's something that I don't know. I don't know if they add some magical trick that it might make sense, but I wouldn't bother to release such a lens if I would be Tamron. There might be more interesting options like the 28mm, the 30mm 1.4, or the 75mm 1.4, but that's it. They also patented a couple of macro lenses, the 60mm 2.0 macro, the 90mm 2.8 macro, the 150mm 2.8 macro, and the 180mm 3.5 macro. I'm not a macro shooter, so I have no particular opinion about those lenses. I think the 60mm 2.0 macro definitely sounds like an interesting, fast option. The 90mm 2.8 macro would be a more affordable version compared to the Sony macro, which is quite expensive, $1,100. If Tamron managed to make a same kind of quality lens for $600 or $700, it might be a good hot seller for them. The 150 and 180mm macro lenses sound very exciting. Usually macro lenses are 60, 70, 90mm. Having 150 and 180mm macro lenses would be a new interesting addition. Tamron also patented some Teleprimes like the 135 1.8 and the 350mm 4.5. The 135mm 1.8 would definitely be an affordable version from the Sony, but we already have competition this range from Sigma and Samyang rocking on, so I don't know if Tamron should really make such a lens, if such a lens would be really needed. It might be more needed to have a 35mm 4.5, which sounds way more interesting for me. Then we also have two telezooms, the 200-400mm 4.0 and the 200-800mm 5.6. Particularly that 200-800mm 5.6 sounds quite crazy to me. Having 800mm 5.6 is really unique. Usually those kind of lenses are very expensive. Also, being 200 to 800mm means this will be a huge, massive lens. So I don't know if they will do it, but I think this would definitely catch my eye and catch the eye of wildlife photographers, sports photographers that might want to use that. Then moving on to the APS-C lineup, we have a 30mm 1.8. This would be something like a 90-20mm lens in full frame terms, which means a perfect lens for vloggers. There's also a classic 18 to 55mm 3.5 5.6, and then a quite stunning 18 to 500mm 3.5 5.6. I can imagine also in this case this would be quite a massive lens and quite unique. I think most I saw was at 18350 from Tamron before. That's a kind of lens for travel photographers that want to cover every possible kind of photography. It might be interesting for them, but they would have probably to carry quite a big lens and heavy lens. So this was the list of all patented lenses. Like I said, only a minor part of those lenses will make it into real production, and it might also be that the real production lens somehow differs in terms of the specs. So maybe the 20-50mm 2.0 will become a 24-50mm 2.0 or a 28-70mm 2.0. But I think Tamron overall is really on the right track regarding lenses. Their thinking is really interesting. They try always to think out of the box to offer something that isn't available yet in the E-mount range. I think this kind of thinking from Tamron will also help Sony in selling their cameras, because maybe people will buy into Sony knowing that they can get some kind of lens that isn't available in other mounts. And as you know also from past interviews, it looks like Sigma is going to also go into the path Tamron made by releasing new kind of different lenses. So I'm also curious about what Sigma will do in 2023. I think somehow a 70 to 200mm variation from Sigma is coming pretty soon, and it will not be a classic 70 to 200mm 2.8, but something more exciting. So I'm really looking forward to this. This was it for today. Again, please subscribe to the channel if you liked that video and if you don't want to miss any of my upcoming videos, and I see you soon.